Antisemitism, a word that has been with the Jews for all the generations that it's existed. We know that it's a word that it was only coined a couple hundred years ago, but it's something that we've not been able to shake off from amongst us. For those of us who have a shorter memory, of course we're familiar with the Holocaust, the Nazis, besides the Arabs that we're dealing with at the present, and of course the communist regime, that we were always having difficulties dealing with each one of them, making gzerot, making always decrees against us, killing us, whether physically, whether spiritually, any way that they can get to us. But for those of us who have learned a little bit of a bit of history, so we of course are familiar with the Spanish Inquisition, which was 1492, but there were many inquisitions that we went through our long and painful history. The French Inquisition 1182, even in England in 1290, and others. The Kozakim, which is known as the Tachvatat Gzerot, were one of the biggest killers that we're familiar with. They were a bunch of peasants. They were on their way to going somewhere else. On the way, they were the ones who killed almost 100,000 Jews in the process. People who were just chasing us for no reasons. The Christians, which we've already forgotten about all the torment and terror that they've done for us, were a lot worse than the Arabs that we're dealing with in the present. Of course, we committed deicide when the Romans were the ones who actually killed their Yeshu. And then, of course, they figured out the best scapegoat was, of course, they go straight to the Jews, and they said that we were the ones who killed them, we were the ones who took care of them. For that, we received almost 1,500 of of stretchers, of being hanged up on crosses, etc. The Greeks, who were upset at us for deciding that we're switching the game plan, and we're moving to one God instead of a prolific God, amount of gods. The Romans, who of course destroyed the base of Mikdash, but before that, we're killing a tremendous amount of bloodshed that was shed as a result of that. The Crusaders, the Inquisitions, everything that we all are familiar with. There's no end to the amount of blame that has always been put on the Jews, and the amount of segregation, the amount of putting away, never wanting to give us positions, always putting us in ghettos, always making sure that we were the ones who were responsible when during the black bubonic plague, when everyone was dying. Of course, it was our fault for poisoning the wells. Of course, we are also so familiar with the famous blood libels of putting blood inside of the matzot, which was made up by some pope, and it never left us since. The more famous one is William of Norfolk in England, who was killed, and of course the Jews were blamed. We were always the scapegoat of everyone. They're always the Yosef, always the one that one can put their finger on and say it was always our fault. And of course you would assume, after all this, in our present day equal amount of history, when equal amount of society, when things we're in a state of equality and people are trying to be one big mixing pot and not to make any differences between one and the other, so we'd assume that all of us should be something that's behind us. And of course we see, especially 2024, Tafshin Pei Daled, and the amount of anti-Semitism which is going around in the world, which is basically no better word than to say unexplainable. It's absolutely unexplainable. When we're sitting here trying to basically defend ourselves after a crusade that we just went through, after an absolute tevach, an absolute slaughter of over 1,200 people that were killed in ruthless blood, and we know that as long as there is one Hamas person around, that the state of Israel will not be able to survive. We know that we cannot stay here anymore. And even though, if you want to say 70% of the Hamas were extinguished, if you extinguish a fire and leave just one little flame alive, we all know what happens. It all recombusts. It all comes back. The flames just reburst again. You have to get rid of it out of sof, and everybody knows that, including those people protesting in the universities. Everybody understands that. But the only difference is that they're not interested in that happening. They're not interested in Bnei Yisrael being here in any type of way or form, and therefore they're running after us, trying to make sure that we don't finish the job. They're running after us, saying and blame. Here we are, still have a bunch of hostages that are still being trapped in a dungeon, mamish Gehenna. There's no better word from it. They're sitting in hell right now, underneath the ground, dying day after day, one after the other, suffering like there's no end. And still, they're telling us, just leave them, just stop the war and leave them. Take a handful of them. Okay, you have 130, so take 30, we'll let you have 30 and leave the rest of them to rot. It all comes from one place, absolute and despicable hate for the Jews, a disinterest for our existence, from the river to the sea, to make sure that we don't even exist, to make sure that we're here. And this is the biggest chiddush of all, and this is the point, and we're going to try to explain this one, is The whole purpose of us moving to this land, and maybe if you want to say claiming the land for the past 70, 80 years, was one and only purpose. When Herzl was so perturbed about the Dreyfus trials that happened in France, and the fact that Dreyfus was a Jew and he was being persecuted, so he had this idea of coming to Eretz Israel, even though there were Jews already here beforehand, for one and only reason, only for one reason. And that was to avoid all the criminal anti-Semitism that was happening in all the countries. Look, every country we were in, they always were blaming us. If it was because we were parasites and taking all the resources without helping, or if it was because we're doing too much, we're taking all the money from them. If it's always because of some reason, because we're segregating ourselves from them, or because we're mixing in too much with them, there was always a type of anti-Semitism that was around. And therefore, he decided that we should go ahead and make our own country. And that would solve the anti-Semitic problem. Guess what? We've only been smart enough to learn from our experiences in the past, especially 40, 50 years, but from the beginning, that is exactly the opposite. Not only did it not help the anti-Semitic situation, it made it only worse. Whereas in the past, in history, the country that we lived in, they were the ones that were against us. That one country, the two countries that were surrounding, those are the ones that are against us. Now, the whole entire world is against us. We have our own country. We separated from everybody else. We're going ahead and sucking up Jews inside of Eretz Israel in order to avoid being in other countries. And now we end up having every society in the world that's against us, instead of just having that one specific society, that one specific country that was against us. It caused and absolutely backfired in an unbelievable way. The Kol Zeh Omer Darsheni. And all this is coming to ask us, how can it be? Where did this come from? How did such a thing occur? So I'm going to quote basically one important mandamar, and in the end we'll finish up with a few Mar Makomot, but one person, and that's Rav Yerucham Levovitz. Rav Yerucham Levovitz was the Meshgiach in the Mir. He was nifter in 1936. That's right, 3 years before World War II, before the Holocaust. But he was around in Poland and Germany when all the uprisings of the Nazi regime was coming to its fruition, that he was also familiar with. And I want to quote to you in the Sefer Dat Torah a number of pieces which he speaks about this in Parshas Toldot Chafei, in Parshas Achrim Yud Chet, in the Ma'amarim, in Vayikra, in Dat Chochma Musar, in a number of places he speaks about this. And I just want to speak this out because I think these words are gold. These are words of a man with absolute vision of the future. He knows exactly what's going to happen and what's happening in front of his face even before the Holocaust itself happened. He writes over there, as I read from the Sturmer, of course, was the newspaper of the Nazis. It was written by Julius Streicher. He was the main person who was the one who was putting it together. He was the one who actually committed suicide at the end when he was convicted on the Nuremberg trials. And over there he writes, every time I read, I always know how it's going to end. There's no connection between one keta and the next, one paragraph and the next. Sometimes they point us to us as the ones who are taking all the money. We're the ones who are separating ourselves. We have no nimus. We're not aesthetic. We don't take care of ourselves properly. And then he says on the other things, we're the richies, we're the ones who take all the monies, we're the ones who are always trying to mix in together with all the Germans. We think that we are German and we're trying to take advantage of them. One paragraph doesn't even connect to the next. He says they are reprinting the protocols of the elders of Zion. For those who are not familiar, that was the book that spoke incredibly about how the Jews are taking over the world. We're here to slaughter all the Germans. We're the ones who are making all the decisions in the war. We're the ones who are deciding every nick and cranny what happens in the government and everything around it. And we're the ones who are sitting on top of the world. And he says, reading all the words of this newspaper is one thing. Seder, the guy was a Russia. But what he can't believe is how everyone's licking it up. Everyone's sucked up to every word that it tells, and it's Torah Sinai, every word that's said there is believed, as if it's a met la'amito. And he says, what's the pshat? How can it be such a phenomenon? He says, Ella, and it's like this, and he says this over and over again. Halacha Esau Sonat Yaakov, we know that when it says Esau Sonat Yaakov, when there's a resistance between Yaakov and Esau, between the Goyim and the Jews, it's a halacha. What does it mean, a halacha? Halacha is something when you have, a halacha means a rule, a law. A law comes when you have a disagreement and you decide on a law. We bring up a halacha that comes in Shulchan Aruch. But he says because it's ingrained in the nature of the world. It's ingrained in the nature of societies. It's ingrained in the nature of of everything that we're surrounded by, that there's a milchama between Esau and Yaakov, that there's a milchama between the Goyim and the Jews, that they're dissatisfied with the fact that we exist. The existence itself is what's perturbing. It's not what we do, it's the fact that we are here. Believe it or not, the Prime Minister himself a week ago said the same thing. That we are here. And as Rav Yerucham writes, "Hamilchama atzma hiya tachlit." Most people, they have a war in order to get to somewhere. We're focusing on a goal to get to a certain place. But by this specific war, this is the war because the war is for the thing itself. In and of itself. For the war, is the purpose of the war is the war itself, not for trying to get to any place else. So you can try from here till tomorrow, it doesn't make a difference. Because it's ingrained in the tev of the world that that's what it is. He says, he was walking down the sidewalk over there in Germany, and it was a busy sidewalk with many people going back and forth. And there was a kid, a young child of 3-4 years old, who was playing with a broomstick. He was playing around the broomstick, and as he walked by, the boy raised the stick and wanted to hit him with the stick. He said, I just don't understand it. Hundreds of people walk by, or hundreds of goyim over and over again. What made him decide, Dafka, to pick the stick up on me? What put it in him to be able to do it? These are the words of Rav Yerucham. Ki mi limed al chatul lisot ha'achbar. Who taught the cat to hate the mouse? Who taught him? What, was he raised that way? His mother taught him that this is what we do? No. Because it's in the tev of the bria. It's a natural phenomenon, and that's the way it's supposed to be. Just like Eish and Mayim, fire and water, are betachlita hepech, the exact opposites, polar opposites one from the other. That kenu soda umot v'Yisrael. So too is it, the yisod of the nations with Yisrael. Kedusha v'tuma, when you have purity and impurity, when they're opposite one from the next. So yes, there's an antithesis between them. You have polar opposites between them. There's positive and negative. They don't mix. Things don't go together. He says, from when do you ever see a nation that's interested in destroying the people that live within them themselves? A nation wants to destroy another nation, but your own citizens, your own abiding citizens, one that are very loyal and doing what you can, and there's a small amount of people, they're not even that much. Since when do they try to take advantage of them? Elamai, it's in the Teva of the Bria. We saw it already by Paro. We know by Paro it says, Vayomer alamo. Hinem am b'nei Yisrael rav ve'atzu mimeno. B'nei Yisrael are bigger and getting bigger than us. Mimeno, as the Midrash says, shekol ma sheyesh lahem shelanu. They're trying to take advantage of us. They think that they own everything that's above us, and therefore we have to get rid of them. It's already happened 3,300 years ago, and it's happening today. There's no difference between them. Doesn't matter where we run and hide. It's not going to make a difference. As he points out over there, until the time of Mashiach, nothing's going to happen. Says Rav Yerucham in the Ma'amarim in Vayikra, another incredible piece. Over there he says, so those people in America say that a Hitler will never come to them. A Hitler has nothing to do with us, it's a Germany thing. It's something that happens over here, and again, he's talking about pre-war Europe. And he says, Shaita hu amedaber azot, foolish are the ones who say such things. Einenu yodim sheke'erefayim yochol itapchut kazeh gam be'acherim. This transformation, this turnover can happen by anyone, not just over here. And if you don't believe me, Hitler yochiach. Hitler himself was the biggest proof to this. Because as he, like I said, is sitting in German Nazi Europe, he himself says that over here we were surrounded by culture, the highest of all cultures. Germany back then, 100 years ago, was the highest of all the cultures. Shivu Zchuyot, there's equality surrounded by us. It's just a nation that believes in equality. And here we have it. We've gotten to a day that every day is worse than the day previous to it. He says, Gzerot ke'Haman, just like Haman makes Gzerot over here, we have the Nuremberg rules. We have things that are getting worse. And how is it happening in such an abiding society, such a society that is so cultural, so aristocratic? How can it be? He says, Elamai, it's all beteva. It's a nature. It's a nest that we are alive. It's a nest that we exist. Hashem, the fact that we are still here and that we can still be around, and the fact that the goyim don't end up trying to finish us off is a nest. The biggest nest, he writes over there, from all the 10 makot, from all the 10 plagues that we went through in the splitting of the sea, the biggest of all the nests, Hashem natan et chena am b'nei Mitzrayim. That when we left Mitzrayim, that the Mitzrayim liked us, that the Mitzrayim cared about us, they gave us presents, they were there. That was the biggest of all the nisim. Unbelievable. Something that we overlooked, he even says, because it's not a natural phenomenon. And here he says a connection, you have to hear it well, because if you understand it in depth, it's an incredible thing. He says, the kevis that is surrounded by the shivim zehevim, the sheep that is surrounded by the 70 wolves, Eineno bal davar al etzem kiyuma. That sheep doesn't have his own free will and decision to be able to survive. The fact that he is mitkayem, the fact that he exists, is not within his privilege to decide if that's going to happen. He's surrounded by 70 wolves. It's by the privilege of something above him that's going to decide, is he going to be devoured or is he not? Kmo ken lanu en lanu zchut. We don't have our own individual privilegia, as they say in Hebrew, our privilege to be able to survive or not. It's up in Shamayim, it's up above. And we are surrounded here by 70 wolves. And yes, we have to know that it's not a surprise what happens. Everything that we are and hearing from around us, for a person who understands this in depth, is not surprised. Just like David HaMelech. David HaMelech was supposed to be born and die. He was supposed to be a stillborn and not survive. And we all know that he received 70 years as a present from Adam HaRishon that gave 70 years of his life so David HaMelech can live. And David HaMelech ended up being the king of Israel. Someone who wasn't supposed to be survive at all, and he ended up surviving. How is that true? Because Dalet from David is Dal. He knew how to humble himself. He knew that everything, his whole life was a present. He was a walking present. He realized that everything was a privilege. Every second that he's breathing another breath is another reason to give a thank you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's why he's the man who wrote Tehillim. So too, Bnei Yisrael, when we understand that we don't have actually our own individual privilege for being able to survive, and it sounds like hard words, but it's not. Our whole privilege is the fact that we are Avdei Hashem, that we are B'ni B'chari, that we are a chelik of Elokam Imal, that Hashem is the one who's taking care of us. He's the one that's above us, so that gives us a privilege of survival. Only then we do, and therefore there's nothing to complain about anymore. Because as long as we know that we're being given presents every day and every second, you don't complain about the fact that sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't. Our whole privilege is the survival of this. Listen to the words of the Chofetz Chaim. The Chofetz Chaim says in Parshas Vayetze an incredible thing. And this explains it all. If you understand these words in depth, and this is a point of reality. We're surrounded by reality right now. Before we forget it, this is the time to realize it. He says like this, we know that Lavan said, Abanot Benotai, Ve'abanim Benai, everything that you see around you, Yaakov, it's all mine. These girls are mine. Your children are all mine. Everything around here is all mine. Everything that's around you, it all belongs to me. But you know, this is the same Yaakov that we just read it by in Pesach. We said he was loving Bikesh L'akor et hakol. He's the one that wanted to kill everything. 1 minute you're telling me it's all yours. The second thing is you want to kill the whole entire camp. If Hashem didn't stop him, he was going to wipe us out. He would have committed a genocide, completely kill everybody out, from Yaakov all the way down. That was his intentions when he was chasing after them. But you just said it was Beno Benotai. Says the Chofetz Chaim an incredible thing. He says it's the same thing. It really is the same thing. Even if the Jews have accomplished so much, even if we are responsible for a tremendous amount of technological advances in the world, even though many billionaires, many millionaires are all Jewish, even though we've contributed to the social societies, to the whole all the websites that have been around, to everything that we've contributed, it doesn't make a difference. Habenot Benotai. The Goyim say this is all ours. It belongs to us. You are living in our auspices. It's all yours. You want to move to Eretz Yisrael and say, okay, so it won't be like that? No. You're still ours. You're still Avadim. We are the masters and you're Avadim. Avadayhem, you are still my avadim. And masha kana eved kana rabba. And whatever a slave owns belongs to his master. It goes straight to the person who's in charge of him. You don't own anything. It doesn't matter where you move. It doesn't matter how far you try to run. It doesn't matter how accomplished you are. Always remember, you are ours. You don't own anything. That is the feeling that we are surrounded by on a constant basis. And therefore, when we try to pick up our head, try to pick up our nose, or try to pick up our machine guns, or try to throw some missiles, or even try to protect ourselves, you don't have any privilege for such survival. Who says that you deserve it? They'll be picketing in every college campus, and those surrounding it, and trying to understand why Israel deserves to be here. You don't really be to be here. You can be, and we never wanted you in our country either. There's one place we really want you, from the river to the sea, in one of those. They're not interested in our thing. You know, when the Tolerance Museum, I was raised in Los Angeles, and I remember seeing the Museum of Tolerance going up in Los Angeles. And they went to Rav Gedalia Shor in New York, and they told him about this Tolerance Museum, and it was one of the first Holocaust museums that are coming around. Since then, obviously, there's been a number. And they were pointing out to him what it's all about and what they plan on doing over there. So you know what he answered to them? He says they think that by doing that, then the Goyim will humble themselves in front of us and they'll say, oh, we're sorry and apologize. He says, afuch. You're teaching them a school of what you can do to the Jews. You're giving them some education about how bad you can do things to the Jews and get away with it. He says, on the contrary, if anything, it's only going to backfire. And these is as Makorot, and with this I'm coming to a finish, but just to give you some sources, this is not just from the sources I quoted to you, but listen, Or Chaim HaKadosh, in Parshas Kedoshim, in Perek Chavav, or in Bamidbar, in Perek Tzayin, he says this Mefurash, he says these words, Kol HaUmot Sonei Yisrael B'tivam HaMitkadeh. They have a jealousy of the Jews that they think they're so special, and they hate them B'teva, naturally. V'usini Yusadit Ve'ein La Tmura. There's no exchange for it. It's an automatic. Rabbeinu B'chai in Parshas Kedoshim also, Avdil Etchem Mina Amim. When I separate from the Goyim, he quotes the famous Gemara in Shabbat that says, why is it called Har Sinai? Sinai is from Lashon Sin'ah. From Lashon Sin'ah. What does it mean, Sin'ah? Because from the time that we received the Torah, the Goyim hate our guts. They don't want us existent. Everything we have to say is not interested. The Rambam, the Rishon, the Rambam, in his Igeret HaTeiman writes, because of their kina for us, and for the fact that we feel that we are the chosen nation, therefore they chase after us, they don't give up, they persecute us, and it will not end. Says the Rambam, you could try your best from here till tomorrow, it doesn't happen. But you have to know, with this I finish, that it comes all for a good purpose. As the Beit HaLevi writes in Parshat Shmot, and the Netziv by Eicha, they say an incredible thing. This is all for our good purpose, because it makes sure that we stay separate. It makes sure that we can stay our individual selves, and that's what keeps us alive. And yes, it was this persecution for the past 2,000 years that a nation without any country being thrown from one end like a ping pong, from one country to the next, bouncing from one place to the next, has been able to survive. And that's only for one reason, because b'damai chayi, or we survive by the dam of Brit Milah, or dam of Korban Pesach, by doing mitzvot. We survive by the blood of sometimes shedding for the sake of doing a mitzvah, or we have a different type of blood, the one that comes from all the deaths, the torments, the pogroms, all the things that, the liables, everything that we've gone through. There's one way or the other, it keeps us separate from the Goyim, and it worked very nicely. And that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu does it. As the Netziv writes over there, Eicha Yeshva Badad. Eicha Yeshva Badad. Badad means individually, by yourself. He says, Be'emet, he brings from the Midrash. Hashem said, I wanted you to sit Badad, I wanted you to sit individually, aristocratically, in your own palace, to be separated in a very special way. But as much as you mix in, so I have to switch it to a different Badad, the Badad of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. You're alone, and you're in a place where you can't come out of it. That's the difference between these two types of understandings, and we have to understand that this is really an incredible idea, and if we understand it to its depths, then we'll finally get an understanding of what we're surrounded by. Yes, there is no place to run away. There's only one place to run, and the answer is to be able to be mitached together, to combine together, as we say, biyachid nenetzach, to group together and work together, because we're in it together. And there's nowhere for us to fight against each other, because when that happens, then everything else breaks out. When we turn to our Torah, our Chachamim, when we go ahead and we meched each other, when we put ourselves together through this type of phenomenon, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu should protect us from not only the Oyev, this Arab enemy that we're surrounded by over here, but if I could say, the bigger Oyev, the bigger enemy that we are surrounded by, which is the nations of the world that are trying to have us finished. That's fun.